Anyway, first up, a new announcement from Ducati, which is going to be, I think, well received. And that is that they say that on Friday, the 24th of May, before the Bike Shed show opens to the general public, selected media, that's us, will have exclusive access to the global reveal of 2 never-seen-before Scrambler prototypes. We won't be going on the Friday, but we'll cover this on the Saturday at the show. And it's a unique blend of authenticity, lifestyle, and modern design that characterizes the Scrambler. And it's about to get even more character. I don't know what that could mean. Anyway, we'll get onto that in a sec. The Ducati stand at the show will also be the stage for a live custom painting of a Scrambler icon by Tom Fuller, one of the artistic forces behind the renowned custom paint and design house, Image Design Custom. So look, mate, let's have a little brief history of the Scrambler. It was launched in 2015, wasn't it, with this sort of air-cooled engine. I think it's derived from an air-cooled Monster engine. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It's basically a Monster, and if you've ridden them kind of back-to-back, there's a lot of carryover between them. It feels a little bit more refined, maybe a little less powerful. I don't know whether that's just me, but maybe a little bit less strong low down, compared to mine at least. Yeah.
Got you. And it's got this retro styling package, which is influenced by the Ducati Scramblers of like the 70s and 60s or 70s. I think 70s, but that yellow paint job with the tank side panels. It's all a reference back to their history. What year was yours? You had the Scrambler icon, and that is from the first gen, isn't it?
Yeah, I had the 2015. So I had the...
Oh, was it?
The first year, I
guess.
Wow.
Is that like the first edition of a book? Like it's more valuable because it's the first... Or is it less valuable?
There was a nice chip in the tank, yeah, that one of my previous colleagues did, yeah.
You should have kept it in the wrapper. After that, they spun out a few variants. So they had the Scrambler icon, then they had was it a cafe racer? Desert Sled, which was the more off-roady and tall suspension version.
I think it was a longer swing arm as well on the Desert Sled.
Yeah, and they reinforced the frame and a few things like that. Did they have a full throttle as well? I think they did of the first gen. So there was quite a few different takes on it. But then last year or the year before, they announced this second generation of the Scrambler. It was a major update with tweaks to the chassis, new bodywork, different wheels and things like that, a new technology package with a TFT display, but with fundamentally a very similar feeling engine, pretty much the same air-cooled L-twin at the heart of it. And you went out on the launch of that bike, didn't you?
Yeah, I don't think they'd thank you for sort of saying that it's the same, although it is. I remember on the launch, they were sort of like, oh, it's like 95% of it is brand new. And you're like, okay, but how does it feel so similar then? But yeah, so even though they sort of touched upon everything on the bike, yeah, a lot of it was kind of a visual, like you say, the technology on it. And the biggest thing for me was just the fact that the throttle was that much smoother, which was always one of the complaints from a lot of people for the previous gen or the original Scrambler, because it was a bit choppy on the
previous one was a cable, right?
It was, yeah, and it was a little choppy on the throttle, but there was certain things like putting, I think it was like shims that you could put in there, or a washer even, just fix the throttle a little bit. So it's something you could remedy, but yeah, it was a little raw feeling. But I think actually when we took it out, maybe you appreciate that, because it can be quite fun to have something feel so sort of direct and simple.
Yes, the first gen was a fun bike to ride, but I think if you're commuting and stuff, that choppiness does get quite wearying, and so probably the ride-by-wire on the new version was largely an improvement. I know exactly what you're talking about with the throttle spacers as well. I think it's throttlespacers.com. They make them from Ducati, and they also make them for Triumph bikes as well, and it takes that initial millimeter of slack out of the throttle travel, and that means that it's just, it doesn't really change anything to do with the engine. It's just the sense of control that you've got with the throttle. And I did those on my Street Twin, and I do think they made a positive difference. So quite a good little mod if that sort of thing bugs you. And I think they're only like 30 quid or something, which in the grand scheme of things, if it's a bike that you ride every single day, is generally not too bad. Although, it is a mild improvement to the kind of the feel of it. But like I said, I wouldn't expect it to fully eliminate that problem. Another good idea as well is a booster plug on the Street Twin as well, which was a little bit choppy on the throttle. I don't know if they make them for the Scrambler, but basically it kind of boosts the amount of fuel when it's ticking over and stuff like that in the lower revs, I think. That meant the difference between on and off the throttle was less, I think. And so that eliminated a little bit of chop. That might be a bad explanation. But basically, what happened then when they updated to this second generation with the largely improved throttle that you wouldn't need throttle spacers for or a booster plug, is that they slimmed the range back down, didn't they? Just to the Icon, which is this yellow, most kind of retro-looking version, or the one that looks most similar to the original Scramblers. A Night Shift, which is spoke wheels and flat bars and a tuck and roll seat and a really nice deep blue paint job. So that's kind of more custom style. And then they had the Full Throttle, which is more flat track inspired. And we had a really good day at Ducati, taking all three out and trying to decide which one we like the most. All of them quite fun on the road. But I think in the comments of videos about the Scrambler, ever since it's been announced, there's been a lot of, I don't know, disappointment perhaps that they took a few of those other bikes out of the lineup, specifically the Desert Sled, which had a great reputation for being such a brilliant off-roader. It's kind of, it's a retro Scrambler that can actually do a bit of the business off-road.
Yeah, I think that is a loss. That is something that feels missing from the range, because everything else really is just sort of custom tweaks that maybe you could do yourself as well, really. If you want to go on a sort of high-end custom, a lot of this thing is, just change the wheels, change the colour, change some sort of accessories, indicators and things like that. But when it comes to actually how the bike rides and performs, the Desert Sled rode significantly different to the Icon. So yeah, it's a bit of a loss. It'd be nice to see it come back.
I think almost certainly I'd expect that to be one of the two. Although they do say, I just referenced it a moment ago, that the Scrambler is about to get even more character. Which I didn't really think hints, there's nothing really there. It says a unique blend of authenticity, lifestyle and modern design. There's nothing really saying the Scrambler's about, that sort of rugged off-road vibe and it can go anywhere. There's nothing in the press release about that. And so that is, I don't know, maybe hinting that it won't be a Desert Sled.
Yeah.
And then what else could it be?
Well, what are you hoping for? If you were there, what is going to wow you on the day?
It's a really good question, mate. Honestly, I actually have no idea if it's not. I mean, the fact that there are two, I can't even think of more than the Desert Sled. I think that's the most important thing. Yeah. It's almost like a cult bike. People who own them seem to love them. Like you say, it's not really a bike that you can DIY very easily to get something similar out of the new one from the accessories catalogue. But beyond that, I don't really have any other ideas, so I'm really interested to see what it is. But I did put it out to our YouTube audience on the main Motobob channel. I put a community post and asked people what they wanted to see. So I thought I'd rattle through a few of them to get some inspiration. So, here we go. Adith Yam Segar, 8753, suggested definitely a new Desert Sled. I hope they bring back the old pearlescent white and black paint job with the red accents. And I really hope they bring an 1100cc version of the Desert Sled for those who felt the existing 800 was a bit lacking. I guess even more character does suggest that it could be actually a different engine or something like that. I hadn't even considered that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, for some reason, I hadn't even crossed my mind. Yeah, I mean, the 1100, for me, makes sense the way they kind of oriented that, to have the 1100 be a road bike and not do an off-road version. Because if you really were going to go and take your Ducati Scrambler off-road, then 800 is absolutely fine to get out of it what you need, right? I mean, even Royal Enfield Himalayan can break traction off-road. So anything above that is, well, not anything above a Royal Enfield. Maybe you could get away with a little bit more power. But when it comes to like 800, it's more than enough to have a great time off-road. And it also keeps it relatively, lighter than an 1100 would be. So I don't think I'd be screaming out for an 1100 off-road version. I understand why that would be exciting, but I think keeping 800 is fine. But you're right, it could be that they're actually just bringing out a bigger version of it, which also they're sort of lacking from the lineup at the moment.
I really loved the 1100, and I think I don't know if it's underrated, but a lot of people say they prefer the 800 because it is smaller and lighter. And even as a road bike, a lot of people prefer that. And yeah, I do get it, but when I rode the Tribute Pro 1100, the really nice yellow one with the retro Ducati logo on the tank, it's like a 70s logo. I just really enjoyed it, mate. Honestly, I thought it was like a bit of it felt more muscular, a bit more squat. Yeah. The sound was fantastic. There was all that torque on tap. And so I don't know if it's just my particular taste.
Well,
so that's what
I agree with you. I borrowed that one for a long-termer as well, actually. So I got that for like sort of 2 weeks from them as well. So I agree. And my angle or my question was really, does it give you more? Is it worth going for the 1100? So maybe I sort of communicated incorrectly, but I think that the 1100 on the road makes sense to me, and it was a nicer bike, and I preferred the 1100. It wasn't a huge amount more power, but enough to make a difference. But if I was going off-road, like I say, if you really were going to go and take your desert sled off-road, then I think 800 is fine. I wouldn't be screaming out for more power, because ultimately I probably couldn't use all of what the 800 has off-road. It's just that if you were going to use that one as a taller bike and you just wanted it to look like it could go off-road, but realistically you're just going to use it on tarmac, then yeah, fair enough. An 1100 would make sense.
There's a couple of other suggestions for different engine configurations here. So D Viper 11 says 698 mono-powered Scrambler, or better yet, throw in a Monster 698 Now, the 698 mono is their new single-cylinder liquid-cooled engine that powers that new Hyper Motard. Haven't tested it out yet, but it's coming in June or July, I believe. So looking forward to taking it for a spin. I wouldn't necessarily say that's even more character, as per the press release. Or maybe for some people, it depends if you like a single or not. But I think that the L-Twin air-cooled is like the most probably nostalgic or emotive Ducati engine configuration for most people. And I'd say that is peak character. But certainly a 698 mono would be a very lively thing because it's nice and light. And it still makes around the 70 horsepower mark, maybe a bit more actually. So it could make for a slightly more punchy Scrambler. But
I think that's a long shot. I also think maybe we're missing the sort of double meaning of the word character when people talk about bikes, which is sometimes it means it just feels really nice, and sometimes it means it's worse, but I can't find a better word for it. So yeah, maybe, and I'm not saying the single cylinder is worse, but generally speaking, if it was a choice between one cylinder or two cylinder, I'd be going for the two cylinder. Having lived with singles for a while, they're great, but there is a sort of ceiling, there's a limit to it, at which point you sort of go, yeah, I'm kind of over this now, and I'd prefer it to be a little smoother, maybe rev out a little bit more. But no, I'm very curious to try that one, because obviously that's a new single, and it's not quite as raw or unrefined as singles of old.
I've been riding quite a lot of single-cylinder bikes recently, like the Triumphs and the Husqvarna, Svartpilen 401, the Himalayan 450. And I've got to say, I'm really looking forward to a few twin-cylinder bikes.
Yeah.
I've got the 1390 Super Duke coming as well, big V-twin. Not that they're bad, and they do a job, and they're certainly suited to a certain price point as well. It's obviously, nice torquey little engines. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily my favourite and a bike that I permanently want to be riding, especially with the Himalayan, which we talked about a little bit. It's slightly buzzy at motorway speeds and stuff. And yeah, a nice twin sounds good. So hopefully they keep the Scrambler that way. User JI5ZGANI50 says, I know it's not the first Ducati Scrambler that comes to mind, but I'd really like to see another A2 compatible 400cc Scrambler like the 62, which is a good point, actually. That's one that disappeared from the lineup that kind of went unnoticed. And certainly, if you're A2, a bike like that is probably going to look quite appealing. I think it was slightly lower on price as well. And they've dropped it from the lineup. So maybe that'll come back?
Possibly. I mean, to be fair, in terms of the market at the moment, that sort of that bracket is having a bit of a resurgence because, like you said, you mentioned the Triumphs, right? So you've got some smaller capacity Triumphs out there. You've got obviously still the Svartpilen from Husqvarna, KTM. You've got Royal Enfield. So actually, as far as a bracket goes, I think that's probably more dictated by market, right? If they just see that people are buying it, then they'll be like, I want a piece of that action. And they did have one. So that would kind of make sense. I mean, that wouldn't necessarily wow me, but it would be maybe a sensible choice for him. So it'd be cool to see. Yeah,
I hadn't really considered that. It's a good point. There's so many manufacturers sort of pushing into that space that maybe it is actually more lucrative than it appears from the outside. Gojo Satoru Sama said Ducati Cafe Racer is the need. And what I've been saying, I've got two thoughts on this. Number one, I'd be quite surprised because cafe racers generally have been discontinued, like the BMW R9T R9T Racer, sorry. The Thruxton recently got discontinued. So it doesn't seem like there's a big demand for clip-on uncomfortable bikes like that. But I will say, Bike Shed Show is probably the most clip-ons per square mile of the year. And also, of all the bikes that fit into this, the Scrambler's about to get even more character versus a desert sled or a 698 mono version or a 400cc A2 version. Cafe Racer is actually the one that fits the bill most accurately.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with your point. I think that people are moving away from it a little bit. The Ducati Scrambler Cafe Racer never really made sense to me. It's one of those names where you're like, just throw some words together, right? It just doesn't. It's what a biker's like. Oh,
I hadn't thought of that.
They're like scramblers. They like cafe racers. Yeah, it never really made sense. But then Scrambler it's a brand. It's not necessarily saying this is a Scrambler, take it off road. And that's not true of really almost any of the lineup, because you wouldn't properly go and take them off road. They're not the most appropriate tool for the job. So yeah, no, it was a good bike though. I would say though, really nice looking bike. To me, that feels more like a monster, like a sort of custom monster, and I think it maybe leans more into that. But yeah, it was a good bike regardless. The only issue I had was the name.
The only thing I will say about that Cafe Racer, I mean, I agree, the name is like, is it an oxymoron?
Yes.
I guess they're not quite exclusive, but it does seem like a bit of a contradiction, let's say, at least. Is the proportions... I mean, it's kind of a cool-looking bike, but maybe the proportions look a little bit weird, because you think of like a Cafe Racer being quite stretched out and having this straight line through the seat, tank and fairing, whereas the Cafe Racer, maybe with the black and the gold wheels, they did one with black and gold cast wheels, that's quite a nice-looking bike. But I think the original, or the 2020 version, sorry, so actually the second version, was spoke wheels, blue frame, silver bodywork.
Yeah.
I don't know, it just looks maybe a bit like it's limited by the Scrambler's fundamental proportions. Like it's got a very flat headlight and almost like I was going to say snub nose to it. And yet they've elongated the seat a bit visually with the sort of seat cowl, and yeah, it doesn't quite work all together for me. But yeah, I think it's quite a high possibility that is one of the bikes we might see.
Could be. Yeah, I think for me, that bracket has been fulfilled a little bit by the night shift. So I kind of don't necessarily see the need. Because of the spoke wheels, the slightly lower bars, the riding position was similar but bearable. So I think that one is a more sort of sensible pick, but we'll see.